We live? Okay. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name's Martin O'Leary. I am the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard. I'm wearing a green t-shirt and shorts today because it is very, very hot in the studio today. Our air conditioning is broken. I'm really sorry about that. We're doing our best. We've got fans, we've got windows open. There is an air conditioner over the far side. We'll manage. Anyway, every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially a big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put their hand up? Oh, loads today. Welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, the University of the West of England, the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunity, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. There's a seat here at the front if you want one, Nick. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So, quick bit of housekeeping. Feel free to move around, make a cup of tea, grab a glass of water from the kitchen if you need one. You may need one. We have a quiet space just to the left of this space. If anyone needs to take a break, you can just pop through just to my left, your right. Just pop in there if you need a break. I'm not expecting a fire alarm. If there's a fire alarm, that's real. Studio team will direct you to the fire exits, which are at the other side of the studio at either end. And there are accessible toilets and baby change over there in the corridor next to the kitchen. If you do get too warm in here today and you need to take a break, there is air conditioning at the other side of the studio. So if you go over there and stand under the big blue tube, you will cool down quite quickly. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. For those of you who are watching online, you can pop your questions into the YouTube chat. I believe Vic will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the room, just stick your hand up. We'll send a microphone around. Do it the old-fashioned way. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. All right, that's all the housekeeping. Our speaker for today is our very own Bridget Hart. Bridget is a writer, creative producer, and editor, as well as the co-director of the queer feminist literary organisation For Book's Sake. As a poet, they've performed across the UK at festivals, libraries, kitchens, basements, and DIY punk spaces. And when they're not doing any of that, they work here as a program coordinator. They're going to be talking today about imposter syndrome and how it can affect our careers and daily interactions, and how we can build resilient thinking about our own self-worth. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Bridget.
Thank you, everyone. Hello. It's absolutely really lovely and completely nerve-wracking to see so many of you here. I am not a professional when it comes to talking about imposter syndrome. This is actually the first time I've actually stood up to talk about it. I like to deal with things by throwing myself in at the deep end and sinking or swimming, as it were. So this is my sink or swim moment. Today, I'm going to be talking through imposter syndrome. I think there's a lot of talk, especially in professional environments, where people will say, oh, maybe I've got imposter syndrome, or maybe it's come up in conversation, but no one's really delved into what that might mean for individuals or what that might mean for the people around you that you're working with, especially as we diversify more workspaces such as PM Studio and other art spaces. So today I'm going to be identifying ways that systematic oppressions and societal norms affect imposter syndrome or manifest. We're going to look at some different categories of imposter syndrome. And then we're going to talk about some ways that we can recognize this in ourselves and use positive reinforcement to big ourselves up and try and get us out of negative reinforcement. So, who am I? I am a working class person. I am the first and last generation in my family to go to university. I am non-binary, I am neurodivergent, and I'm a survivor of abuse. All of these things have contributed to me having imposter syndrome in many different forms. I'm going to go through some of these in a little bit more detail. But this is the background in which I come from. Working in this environment was incredibly scary for me to start off with, but actually it just goes to show that a nurturing work environment can really help to hone positive reinforcement and confidence in the workplace. So that's just a little yay for PM Studio. You're doing really great. Thank you very much. Kind of vibes. How I prepared for this talk. I cried. I cringed anytime someone brought up the talk. I panicked when I had to promote or announce it. I avoided thinking about it until about 25 minutes ago. I'm still completely sure there's someone better to do this, and I will have anxiety for days afterwards thinking about how I could have done this talk better. I think it's really important to be this transparent about things because we live in a society that demands perfection at all times. So sometimes it's good to demystify those things and be like, actually, this is the reality of when you have to public speak, even if you're good at public speaking. This is the kind of stuff that you have to work through in order for you to get to your end result. So imperfection is key during this talk. What is imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome is the condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally, despite being high-performing in external, objective ways. This condition often results in people feeling like a fraud or a phony and doubting their abilities. This is the definition from the website Better Up. They have some really great resources that I absolutely mined for this talk. And underneath, this is my version of a definition of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the enemy of self-worth. It makes us feel that we are undeserving of praise, of celebrating our achievements, comparing ourselves to the people we perceive as more successful than ourselves. I've underlined the word perceive here because I think a lot of imposter syndrome comes from our ideas of other people, our perceptions of how polished and how good they are, when actually they might be as nervous and crumbly as we are under the surface. Where does it come from? I'm now going to go through some systematic oppressions or people that belong to groups that might inherently get imposter syndrome just because of who they are. So women experience imposter syndrome from growing up in patriarchy, which dictates that they are inherently less than men. When I was researching for this talk initially, I watched about 25 TED Talks from rich white women talking about how they had imposter syndrome because they didn't believe that they could be asking for as much money as their male counterparts, or felt that their business was not being, they were the ones not valuing their business and lowering the tone of themselves in society, because women inherently believe that they are less than men, because that is how women are brought up in society, which is something that I think, what wave of feminism are we in now? Like 4, 5? I don't know. But I think this is something that we're increasingly experiencing more as more women are taking up directory roles, roles of power, executive leadership roles. So there's definitely some reinforcement there. There are a lot of powerful women in this room that I'm very inspired by, and part of that inspiration comes from the fact that they are so open and honest about how much they need help or how much they feel that they are undervaluing themselves. I feel like transparency is a really important part of this conversation that we're having around imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome affects people of color when they are tokenized in the workplace. They might be the only person of color and often feel that they must overachieve in order to earn their place. They are also undervalued and overworked, while their white colleagues are more likely to get a promotion or praise. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about these things at the end. Working class people do not have class privilege and often feel inadequate to others who have more resources, education, and financial support. Working class identity is often seen as something to be put away in a professional workplace, causing anxiety around presenting and speaking in the right ways. I have experienced this as a working class person in the arts. The arts is very middle class. I'm often told that I speak rough, or the way in which I approach things is not the done way of doing things. I've also watched a lot of people, other working class colleagues of mine, other artists, not go for opportunities because they feel that then they're not for them or they don't deserve them. The barriers against things like application forms, submissions, things like this can be a huge barrier for working class people. And often they've learned not to speak up about it because they're often dismissed and their experience is not valued. Many neurodivergent people can feel like imposters because they may hide their difficulties from public view. This is also called masking. They're not only work extremely hard to get the results on time in order, but are working in environments that do not support their access needs. So there's a lot of talk about access needs, there's a lot of talk about putting those things in place, but in actual practice of looking after people and their access needs, that can be a bit thin on the ground, which therefore makes neurodivergent people less likely to speak up and ask for help. They think they have to do everything really perfectly all of the time, and they have learnt that from a young age of not being accepted in society, that neurodivergency is weird and not common. It's extremely common. I think there's a lot of people here who are probably neurodivergent in some way. I would say neurotypical is a myth. I think we're all probably a little bit neurodivergent. So we should be celebrating and accepting and making space for people who think outside of the box, or whatever box that is. Box? Fish? Yeah. And imposter syndrome also appears in those who have repeatedly received negative reinforcement from others or come from conflict and learnt behaviours in developing years. This comes from trauma, anxiety disorders, racism, homophobia, transphobia, where we live in a society that tells those people that they are not good enough. When they enter into a workplace, they take those reinforcements with them as learnt behaviours, and that's what often makes it harder for them to speak out or to have opinions, or to push their own work and promote themselves in the workplace. All of these systematic oppressions are intersecting and complex. So we talk about intersection in terms of oppression, we talk about neurodivergent people, we talk about neurodivergent women, black, trans, non-binary people. They might have different types of imposter syndrome based on the levels of oppression that they have experienced throughout their lives. All of these can be subject to tokenism by organisations or groups who scramble to diversify without proper knowledge or care, which makes it less likely for these individuals to speak up and communicate when there is an issue. We live in an age of identity politics where it's important for us to be questioning the diversity of our workforce, our production teams, our delivery teams, the people that we have around us. And often, we scramble to make sure that those people are getting their way through the door, but once they're through the door, that level of care kind of disappears and they're expected to kind of get on with it and find their own way with it without much help. So this is maybe a good point to bring up if you're going to go back to your colleagues and maybe talk about imposter syndrome. It's a good way to maybe recognise in the people that you're working with that this is a thing that you might have to make some space for and make some level of care, bring up in conversation in meetings and things like this. And have conversations with those people about how you can better make space for them and, what's the word I'm looking for? I do this a lot when I can't remember the word for things. Better reinforce them, that's not the word I'm looking for. Support them, we'll just go with support. Support them. So remember this next time you think, oh, everyone on my team is white, I need to put some diversity in here. Think about what that actually means and what actually you're going to put in place to support those people that you're getting through the door, as well as their wonderful skills that they're going to bring to you as well. So imposter syndrome looks like, these are some symptoms of imposter syndrome that you might recognize well in yourselves and you might recognize in the people around you that you work with. Overachieving and perfectionism, inability to assess your own skills and competence, self-doubt even in areas that you excel, negative inner monologue, meltdowns over the smallest mistakes, inability to celebrate or see your achievements. It's akin to anxiety disorder, it's non-communicative. So you might be feeling all of these things on the outside while on the inside, whilst on the outside, you've got this polished, I'm doing really well, I've got this thing on time, but no one knows the crumbling mess that you've become in order to get that in at the right time. So these are some of the things that you might recognize in yourself when you're working on a project or in a team of people. I definitely have an inability to celebrate my own achievements. I find that really difficult. I'm like, cool, well, I've done that. Now let's move on to the next thing and not reflect in any way. Because it's cringy, right? It's cringy to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to celebrate what I've just done. It can feel really distant for you, but actually it can be really good for you and your team around you to have these conversations about what you did well, what could be done better. I think that fosters a really good positive reinforcement of how you can move forward and use those skills and maybe work on your mistakes. Because mistakes are mistakes. People make them all of the time. That's fine. Life is full of mistakes. Life is not perfection and life is not easy, and we learn from things, and I think we can't just be perfect and everything and for everyone all at once. Also, meltdowns is something that I struggle with a lot. I don't know if anyone else here struggles with meltdowns, but like you have a mistake and then you get hot and sweaty in your armpits. I had COVID last week and I made a mistake. Someone emailed me about it and I literally had to sit in the dirty bath because it was cold and calm myself down afterwards, even though I knew that it was a really small thing and it was really easily rectified. I felt I did it, I'm responsible for that, therefore I'm the problem. And you internalize that when really it's just a mistake that you've made. And that's fine. There are loads of factors in why mistakes happen. And when you're working in a team of people, it's often, you know, you can share that load a little bit. You know, there might be some communication issues down the line. Never think that everything is all your fault all of the time. You need to get out of that. Here's a little meme for you. So this is just a sort of meme to describe how you just can't seem to believe people when they say that you're amazing or the work that you've done is great. And you don't believe it of yourself, you don't believe it of your friends, and you don't believe it of strangers that are coming at you. That's imposter syndrome, that's what that looks like. Your inability to be able to say, yeah, I did well, and that's great. And we're not necessarily brought up in an environment that says we should be celebrating ourselves. I was at a presentation in Underwood and the Watershed yesterday for Jill Warman, and she was talking about all the stuff that her company has done over the years in terms of supporting creative business. And Jill is a really well-established and brilliant, brilliant person who has worked here for a long time and has helped a lot of people. And she said, she was like, I'm really worried that this is a vanity project. And someone said, it shouldn't be seen as a vanity project to celebrate the work that you've done in that way. We should be normalizing that a little bit more. So even people up here that you think have got it all worked out and they're all amazing, they're still completely crumbling inside at the fact that they might think that celebrating their own work outwardly is something that they shouldn't be doing because it's wrong in some way. That's wrong. That's wrong. So according to Dr. Valerie Young, who I've never met, but, you know, I'm sure she's very nice. There are 5 types of imposter syndrome. And I've read this about 19 billion times today already. And I think a lot of these actually really overlap with each other. But I want to go through them with you, and I want you to kind of think about what ones you might identify with in yourself, and maybe make a note, mental note, or jot them down if you've got a bit of paper with you. So we have, I feel like I should do some sort of like blind date type of thing. We have the perfectionist. This type of imposter syndrome involves believing that unless you are absolutely perfect, you could have done it better. You feel like an imposter because your perfectionist traits make you believe that you are not as good as others might think you are. Hey. Next up, we have the expert. The expert feels like an imposter because they don't know everything there is to know about a particular subject or topic, or they haven't mastered every step in the process. Because there is more for them to learn, they don't feel like they've reached the rank of expert. Is this you? Note it down. Next up, it's the natural genius. You may feel like a fraud simply because you don't believe that you're naturally intelligent or competent. If you don't get something right the first time around, or it takes you longer to master a skill, you feel like an imposter. Believe me, I am a failed musician. I am a failed baker. I'm a failed this, that, and the other, because I was like, well, I didn't get it perfect right, so I'm obviously shit at it, and there's no point in keeping trying with it, because that person over there is completely amazing and perfect. Next up, we have the soloist. It's also possible to feel like an imposter if you've had to ask for help and reach a certain level of success. Since you couldn't get there on your own, you question your competence and abilities because, you know, everyone around you gets to where they are on their own. They've done all of that on their own. They're not part of a team that you've built together that has helped you to get you where you need to be. No one has said, can I have your advice? Can I have this? Can we do? No one's shared resources. They've all know what they're doing from birth, and that's how they are. They're just perfect the way they are. Yes, everyone's like that. Sure. That was sarcasm. And lastly, we have the super person. This type of imposter syndrome involves believing that you must be the hardest worker or reach the highest levels of achievement possible, and if you don't, you are a fraud. You're not a fraud. Just FYI. I'm just going to constantly reinforce these things as we go along today. So these are the 5 types of imposter syndrome that you might fit into, or you might overlap in some of them as well. I mean, I think some of them are fairly similar. But you can find all these online. Dr. Valerie Young is a lovely person, I'm sure. And all of this is online, so you can just like Google it and find out a little bit more about these things. But is this you? Are these you? You might recognize that in yourself. So yeah, these are some of the ways that imposter syndrome manifests in the workplace. How do we fight it? Well, we can't fight it because it's invisible and it's kind of in our minds. We might have like little mind fists, like, or we might not. I'm really nervous, by the way. Okay, so these are actually some of the ways in which I have combated imposter syndrome that I have found useful to get over myself, as it were, which I have learnt from other people, I also should say as well, especially this first one. When presented with a project or problem, don't focus on the end results, but rather take small steps to achieve or overcome an issue. When I was 2, my mum didn't know I couldn't see without glasses. And I used to run to things on the other side of the room because that's the toy I wanted to play with. And I fell over everything in between that. And I crushed all the cartilage in my nose. And I broke my nose when I was 2. Which was really funny because I taught like this for like 16 years after that until I could get a nose job to fix it. And I like to think of this in this way. This is how I think about things now. I'm presented with something. You've got to organise this mentor's lunch. Right, okay, great. Okay, I've got to do all of these things. I've got to do them all now, all of them immediately. It's really urgent. I have to do all of these things now. Instead of thinking, actually, what's the first step I need to take? What's the first thing I need to do? I need to write down a plan of what I'm going to do, step by step. Then I'm going to do each of those steps one at a time, and I'm not going to look at the next thing until I absolutely have to. You might add more things on the way, but you have to kind of break down these big tasks and think about, okay, how am I going to manage each thing? It's like when you have depression and you are struggling at home and you think, okay, I'm going to brush my teeth today. And that's a really small thing, but that's actually a really big thing to do. So it's kind of looking at things in that way, that really small step process of little bits at a time. Following on from that, ask for help. No one knows everything. We all need other people to get us where we want to go. So that idea of being a perfectionist from birth is a total myth. Everybody has asked help or favors of something at some point in their life. Some people feel more confident and entitled to be able to do that, whereas other people feel like they don't want to, and that's where that imposter syndrome comes from. But we all deserve help. We all deserve assistance. There are plenty of people in and around our lives and our workspaces that have the resources or the outside perspective that we might need just to get us over that little funk with us. Asking for help is something that I have really, really had to practice over the years. And sometimes it is really hard and scary, especially if I'm not having a good mental health day. It can feel really hard to do that. But ultimately, you find somebody that you think is safe and you ask them for help. And if they can't help you, they might be able to find someone else to help you for you. Those little acts of service that we can do for each other around us. The idea is to be open to help, be open to other people asking you for help and how you might be able to help them as well. It's all part of that positive reinforcement that we're going for. Recognize when imposter syndrome appears. Take a moment to reflect on why. Jot down some feelings followed by positive reinforcement of your journey so far. So I had a really big bout of imposter syndrome in a community conversation a few months ago, and I really, really struggled with it, and I could recognize in myself that I was going down this rabbit hole of negative thoughts, that inner critic in my head was saying, what are you doing here? You're too dumb to be here. You don't understand any of this. Why are you here? La, 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 la. And I recognized that voice in myself, and I took myself off, and I got my notes app out of my phone, and I wrote down how I was feeling. I wrote it all down, you know, no grammar, punctuation, none of this perfection stuff. I just wrote down a stream of consciousness about what I was feeling at the time, how I was feeling it, thought about my body, how my body was feeling it, and just being able to take myself off and do that and get those thoughts out helped me to calm down and stop that negative thought process. We might not always be able to do this, but I think it's a good place to start when you recognize that you're having those negative thought patterns. That's step one, basically. So yeah, recognize when it appears, to take a moment to reflect on why it's coming up for you. You don't have to be your own psychiatrist, but you do have to recognize that you are really the only person that's going to be able to get yourself out of that moment. And remember, perfectionism is illusion. Repeat after me. Perfectionism is an illusion. Well done. Stop comparing yourself to other people. This is probably the biggest thing in the age of social media, in the age of Instagram, where everyone's perfectly curated their lives and is amazing and perfect. And, oh my God, well, I'm not doing that, so I must be a shit person. No, you're not a shit person. We all have our own journeys. We all go at our own paces. Some people take longer than others, and that is totally and 100% fine. If you take a longer journey, it just means you learn more along the way. And also, those people probably are having imposter syndrome and anxiety of their own. So, yeah. So back to this positive reinforcement. You don't have to do this now, but this is something that you might want to think about when the thoughts of imposter syndrome, negative thoughts come up for you, is to write a list of your achievements. So this includes, I gave that presentation. I went for that interview. I helped someone with their work. I contributed or made an event happen. If you're in a team of people and you're running an event and you're one small part of that event, you are still part of that event. I am a coordinator here, which I believe inherently is probably one of the lesser impact jobs. But in the teams that I work with, I am made to feel like I am as important as the executive producer in that job. And that is a really nurturing environment to work in. It reinforces my confidence to be able to do my job well. And I know that I'm valued and my opinions and my experience matter. So yeah, Melissa's smiling at me. So yeah, these are like, even if it's just like small things, like I saved the plant from death. These are all things that you've done. So they're all achievements, okay? Write a list of the things that you are good at. This could include bringing a calming dynamic to the group. You don't always have to be the center of attention, loud person. I'm a very loud, extroverted person. But actually, what I value is the calm person in the group who's really chill and just like doing their thing. And that is something that I really value in other people. Doing maths really fast. This is something I'm not very good at. I can't read numbers, I'm really bad at it. But you might be great at it, and I value that from you. Making people laugh. This is probably my favorite thing about myself, is being able to make people laugh. I've been really good at it since a really young age. and public speaking, which is something else I'm really good at. So this is actually a mixture of things I'm not good at, but I am good at. But you take from these examples, and when you are in a moment of crisis and you are being really self-critical of yourself and you get the chance to go off and reflect a little bit, remember your achievements and what you are good at and note them down. And maybe make a nice little color-coded list, stick it to your desk, so next time you're having a wobble, you can read the list and ground yourself and remind yourself that these are all the great things that you do and this is how you contribute to the world around you. So we're going to go into a bit of a discussion now with the person next to you, or if you are watching live, hi mum. I want you to discuss with the person next to you, or you're in threes actually, so maybe in threes in the rows. Discuss the ways in which you feel imposter syndrome, or which types you might feel that you come under, and ways that you might combat this personally moving forward. I'm going to give you like 7 minutes to do this. Is that all right? Generous amount of time? Is that all right? Yeah. Asking your approval. Well, we're going to take 7 minutes to do this. So please have a chat with yourselves and just talk about, I want you to basically have a really frank, open conversation about how you experience imposter syndrome. Talk about it openly with the person next to you. I'll give you 7 minutes. need a foghorn. Oi! Sorry. Just there's a slice of my mum coming out then. Oi! You all sounded like you were having loads of great conversations, and I really encourage you to go away and continue these conversations after this talk finishes, which is actually really soon. And it's really hot in here, so there's probably definitely cooler places that you can probably do that. Just quickly on the back of that, these are some of the resources that I used in order to understand myself and imposter syndrome better. So positiveintelligence.com is it's like a quiz that you do to find out how you work in the workplace. Find your inner saboteur, it's called. So it doesn't go with the 5 types of imposter syndrome that our mate Valerie has put together, but it does help you to break down in which areas that you are like really over trying to excel in, or the ways in which you approach work, so you can better understand. Recognize that in yourself. I'm incredibly hypervigilant, so right down to the last little thing, I'm like, oh my God, but this test told me that, so I was like, oh, okay, I have that validation now, so that's really nice. And the better up is where I use some of the resources, some of the quotes and stuff from today's presentation, what is imposter syndrome and how to avoid it. There are also plenty of other resources out there. Instagram, if you just type in, I typed in IM into Instagram and it came up with imposter syndrome immediately. So obviously that's something that a lot of people are searching about. Yes. And I just wanted to leave you today on these quotes from 2 extremely famous people. Maya Angelou, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everyone and they're going to find me out. And Neil Gaiman, if Neil Armstrong felt like an imposter, maybe everybody did. Maybe there weren't any grown-ups, only people who had worked hard and also got lucky and were slightly out of their depth, and all of us just doing the best job we could, which is the best thing that we can hope for. Thank you very much for coming to my lunchtime talk. Yeah.
All right, folks, we've got a little time for questions. Does anyone have any questions for Bridget? Emma does. Oh, no, sorry, you know Emma.
Thank you, that was fantastic. When you were saying about working at the studio here and how you were made to feel equally important amongst the team, I was wondering if you'd be able to articulate some practical ways that your colleagues have done that.
Inviting me to every meeting, I think is good. Giving me the space to be able to, I think it's more about having I respond well to warm environments, so personable people. That's how I feel comfortable. That's how I feel like I'm supported in that way. I feel like I've been given the opportunity to have a say in the meeting. So people will say, Bridget, what do you think about this? So it's actively inviting people. If you're in a group discussion, you're in a meeting and you're in a big staff meeting and you notice someone hasn't said anything or they're looking a bit like, oh God, maybe that's your opportunity to invite them personally into that conversation, because they might not feel ready to speak up on their own, but would feel better to have that outside encouragement of someone actually saying, I'm interested in your opinion, I want to know what you think about this.
Thank you.
Anybody else got a question? Oh,
Hi, thank you. Can
yes, it's only for the people online. It doesn't do anything in the room.
Oh, hello, people online. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. I really love your presentation style, so thank you. It's great. Got a quick observation and then a question, a sort of a what if. So when I work in a really massive corporate, loads of people, I do a lot of mentoring, and I've got a lot of people saying to me, I've got imposter syndrome. I've got a lot of managers saying to me, oh, my staff have imposter syndrome, so, you know, they find this difficult. And some other reading, and actually some of the stuff you said at the beginning, is all starting to make me wonder, a bit of a what if. What if imposter syndrome is a myth? And what if we flipped it and organisations and cultures and teams and managers create imposters within their teams, a sense of impostership within their teams? Yeah. So because I think when we talk about imposter syndrome, it sits within the individual, and therefore it's the individual's responsibility or the individual to fix it.
Yeah.
We have to fix the individual. But what if it's the culture? And all those things you described about what made you feel not an imposter is good culture, is good workplace culture.
Yeah.
Whereas, so I'm just wondering, what if imposter syndrome is not about the individual, it's about the cultures that we work and exist within. So therefore, the responsibility for fixing it doesn't necessarily sit with us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a bit of a give and take, really. I think there's definitely work that we all have to do as individuals to positively enforce ourselves at times, especially when we come from backgrounds where we are inherently told that we're not good enough, and that's just the way that we've been brought up. And like I said to Emma there as well, like it's about nurturing those people within those groups and recognizing when people are not speaking up or they feel you're recognizing that within them to like bring them into that nurturing environment a bit more and create that space for them. I think it is a two-way street with that, definitely.
Anybody else? Yeah, Melissa.
Hello.
Hello.
When we run R&D projects at Watershed and with UE and all the universities we work with, someone always comes in at the beginning. It's nearly always a woman and says that they feel that they shouldn't be there. So do you think that naming it at the beginning and kind of clearing the air around that is a useful thing to do?
Yeah. I think being transparent and honest and I think we're all very used to working in professional environments that can feel quite cold and that you can't bring emotion into that and you can't bring that mutual support into it, which I don't agree with growing up in the way that I've grown up in. I respond much better to warmth and emotion when I'm working. So I think, yeah, maybe that's worked for my mum very recently, where she wanted to go for a job interview and she's bloody terrified about it. And someone said to her, "You've got imposter syndrome," and they had a chat about it, and it made her realise that it wasn't just within herself that this was created by, and it, I think, helped her a lot to get to where she needed to be. So yeah, I think we should be saying it out loud. It's not a dirty 2 words.
Anybody else? Chloe.
Hello. I wonder what the neurodivergent angle on this is.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes you can't actually look within yourself to understand your successes. Like I can see it in other people, but actually to look at myself is nearly impossible. So like, yeah, what would your thoughts be on this?
Believe other people. I think, I don't know, it depends how your brain works and how you get around that, really. I find lists really helpful. If I'm writing the things down, I think the act of memory, because I can very easily just forget that I've done something, I've forgotten that. But keeping a list or a record, I also, every time someone gives me a bit of feedback, positive feedback, I keep it in a folder so that I can go back and read that when I'm not feeling very positive about things. If you're struggling to like find that within yourself, I don't really have the answer for that, but I think it's just about you finding your own ways of being resilient and being able to reinforce that in you, and maybe believing the people around you, which is easier said than done, I know. But maybe that's about trust as well.
Got one on the online.
We've got a question from online from Nathan. Any tips for how freelancers can combat imposter syndrome?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Any tips for how freelancers can combat imposter syndrome?
Groups, collectives. I have a collective, so I'm also a freelancer. I'm a creative poet and producer, and we have an online group of other working class freelance people, and that's where we come together and moan about things that have happened to us or share our experiences. We also share resources and things like that. Being a freelancer can feel really isolating, and imposter syndrome is really isolating as well. So I think actively having links up with other people that are experience the same things as you in the same way is a really good way for you to reinforce that it's not just happening to you, that you are part of something bigger, that it's a systematic thing, and that you can come together and support each other in that. that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Thank you.
I think we had one over here.
Thank you for that. A lot of that really resonated, so thanks. I was wondering if I could share just something that I found really worked for me. So about 10 years ago, I started a project with John, who I just bumped into today, and had such a huge inner critic telling me that I didn't know enough about leadership, I didn't know enough about how to run workshops, I didn't know enough about all of the things that I needed to start this thing. And what really helped me to silence that inner critic was writing down all of the examples of, like, I know enough about this thing to have achieved this, I know enough about this to have achieved this. And that was a really useful way that, like, that inner critic couldn't argue with those things. But yeah, it also really resonate with the idea of, like, that box of, like, every time someone tells you something positive, like, putting that in a box somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Or has anybody else got anything from their group discussion they'd like to share? Nobody wants to stand up and talk in front of the room.
It's terrifying, to be fair.
Yeah, Nick does.
I guess if there was a future when no one had imposter syndrome, what would have changed for us to get there?
Destroy patriarchy, destroy capitalism, support and nurture an environment that is caring of all people and is kind and nourishing, and we could have breakfast whenever we wanted. I don't know. But I mean, that is a huge question, and I think I would go to my punk roots and say destroy capitalism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Anybody else?
Thanks very much. So it was a fascinating talk. I wondered about a link with the inner critic. And is there a solution around things I tell myself and answering the inner critic?
Well, I went to therapy, which helps. I think therapy can help with things like that. And I learned to recognize that inner critic a bit more and be like, that is one small part of my brain. And there is the other part of my brain that has achieved all of these things. And I'm allowing this critic in my head to overshadow all of the things that I have done, which is not helpful. And I suppose people say this a lot as well, and that phrase of, like, you wouldn't talk to your friend like how you talk to yourself. And I think that's become a bit of like a buzz quote kind of thing, but I think it's true. I think you wouldn't ever talk to your best friend like that, would you? You would never say, oh, well, yeah, but, you might have done that, but you could have done it better or whatever, You would never say that to somebody else. So why would you allow yourself to reinforce that within you and make that a foundational part of how you look at your work and how you interact with others? So, yeah, it's tiny brain fists. Yeah.
Anybody else? So I wanted to ask something, Bridge. A lot of your examples here were workplace related.
Yeah.
How much do you think this is a work-specific thing?
It's not.
It's not.
It's definitely not, no. I think, like, I could have done a whole separate talk about imposter syndrome within queer communities, for queer people, like, big breath in there, yeah. And I realized that I didn't have a huge amount of time, so I chose to specifically talk about the workplace within this. But I experience imposter syndrome in many, many areas of my life, including my home family life as well. And I feel that you could go on endlessly about it. But some of the positive reinforcement things here are things that you can take across to other areas of your life as well, especially in queer communities.
All right. Any last question? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about something that makes me feel really ragey. And I think that you have quite a strong stance on it, but I basically want to like rage bond with you, maybe. So it's about like more recent attempts at certain industries like the arts to have like open days, or let's reach out to the working class artists and let's help you in this way, and with like, we'll educate you about the industry because you can't find that out on your own because you're working in Tesco, or like that rather than like, well, just give me some money. Like and they make me feel really angry, but I kind of want to attend them to see what they're going on about and if they really can offer me something as a working class person. And I wanted to know what you thought about them. I mean, obviously they're not all the same, but do you have experience of these things, or like, what do you think about them? Have you boycotted them? Why? I know that's a huge question, but I'm really interested.
Well, I have some really negative experiences of a teenager of moving into middle-class spaces, of being invited as a working-class person into that space and not being supported in the right ways and things. So I am hugely avoidant of stuff like that, usually. But I used to be very strong stance on that before I started working. I used to work in DIY publishing before this and was very like, well, yeah, screw you, we're all going to do it from the ground up, it's all great and everything. But now being part of an organisational process, it is important for organisations to be reflective and to have these things and to be open about it. But there's still a long way to go in terms of actually allowing those people properly into that space and not tokenising them and not trying to have a conversation at them, but rather one that includes them.
All right, any last questions? Okay, one more.
Thank you. This is half a reflection on like the ways I try to combat this and half a question. When I'm applying for jobs, I find that some of my friends will say, if I'm struggling to celebrate myself, what would a straight white male version say about themselves? And some people find that very empowering, but I find that, I don't exactly want to use the word toxic, but I find that I don't want to have to change my mentality into a different identity to be able to represent myself. So I was just wondering your thoughts on that sort of normalizing that experience or taking on that experience to empower, like those two contesting views, I guess.
Yeah, I've definitely made that joke coming into this today of being like, come on, white man, come on, yeah, I've got it, yeah, I can do it. I've got all the confidence in the world. But even, and I hate to say this, like in this space, but even those people also experience imposter syndrome, but it might come out in different ways, which often it does. I think that, that phrase is reductive and it doesn't really help anybody, and we should have the confidence of a working class non-binary person and like what that looks like and how we can push that out into the world and be like, this is the confidence that I'm going to put out there that is a good example for other people, that they feel that they can then have that confidence too.
All right. I think that is probably all we've got time for.
Great.
I think Bridget is very happy there. So please join me in giving a warm round of applause for Bridget. All right, so before you all go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today, maybe a very hot desk, or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio teams. Studio teams, can you give us a wave? If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you all here same time next week.